with Rafalko, we would do a riding update. Also trying to really get the trot better under saddle and develop his trot. And so where his main issue has really been straightness, Rafalko's main issue has been stabilizing the hindquarters, or that's kind of how I define hindquarter engagement, is by how stable the pelvic bones are, as well as getting the legs closer to the center of the horse's middle. So with Rafalko, we spent a very long time working on tight turns, tight figures of 8, just to kind of get the hind legs back up underneath him, which is the stabilizing part of the stride. When the hoof goes forward towards the center of the body and lands on the ground, it begins what's called the braking phase, which is how movement is stabilized during motion, right? Then there's the pushing phase, where the hind leg actually goes behind the torso or behind the pelvis. So I started getting Rafalko off of tight turns and putting him on a big circle like this. It's taken several rides, and even today I did some groundwork with him yesterday too. I did lunging, walk, trot, canter, both directions, and he's carrying himself much better on the lunge line, which tells me he's integrated a lot of the coordination changes that we've made, but he hasn't really fully stabilized it to the point that I would risk lameness to just kind of continue to lunge him. And he's always been a horse that's done better under saddle compared to the groundwork. So I threw him on the lunge line to do transitions, sort of to see where he was at. And he did great, and he didn't come up lame, playing with walk, trot, canter, both directions. And so today I wanted to ride him, and this is what we've mainly been working on, is getting on a straighter path of travel. He used to overcurl the neck, fall forward, speed up, and if I didn't give him rein resistance, he just couldn't really control his speed or direction. So we've been working on bigger circles, right and left, and I'm mostly following that point of pressure under the saddle to know which direction to work on and to know how he's doing. So when I got on today, there's more pressure on the right back quadrant of the saddle, telling me putting the right hind leg on the inside is going to bring that functional level kind of back up to snuff. That's where he needs the warm up, right? So I'm just going to continue to the right, and we'll see how long it takes him for that little bubble of pressure to shift, or for that pressure to go down or move, or for him to change his neck use voluntarily. Tells me the hindquarters are getting more stable. As long as we can see a bit of curl through the neck, even when it's low like this, he's still shortening the neck muscles in order to compensate for the pelvis not feeling stable to him. And I can feel that under the saddle. So the pressure just came off of my right seat bone and shifted left. And now with every stride, it's sort of shifting left and right. So what that tells me is both hind legs are working equally. I don't have one that's more functional than the other, but he's not very engaged. He doesn't have enough stability through the pelvic bones to really control his body weight through the use of his hindquarters. And when they can do that, we don't feel a point of pressure, and it doesn't shift back and forth. So the shifting back and forth tells me he still needs a little bit of a warm-up, or he needs to keep working on this. I shouldn't call it a warm-up, because this is what we do for the whole freaking ride until he gets stable, right? So if it starts switching back and forth while I'm still tracking right, then sometimes what I'll do is put him on a figure 8, or I'll track left and see where that point of pressure goes under the saddle. But right now it's going kind of left, right, left, right, left, right. So that's just the feeling of the hindquarters not fully engaged and too much weight on the front legs. And when he actually releases this shortening of muscle contraction through his neck, that's going to go all the way through his back. Now just there, those really slow steps, and if I'm doing my job correctly, which is why I drop my stirrups on him, is because he changes that point of pressure from left to right or right to left, or it can shift back and forth while we're on the same direction. I need to really keep up with it with my weight shifts. And if I'm doing my job correctly, I should look like I'm not moving, even though I'm feeling the pressure under the saddle sort of moving back and forth between the left and right sides, mostly in the back half of the saddle. Right? So I'm just going to continue what I'm doing because it went from stuck on the right back quadrant to shifting between the left and right quadrants. So that tells me his right hind leg needed a lap or two to warm up, right? And now both hind legs are struggling to keep the engagement because we're not on a tight turn. So tight turns and small circles make engagement easier, or hindquarter engagement easier, but it makes straightness harder. And tracking on a straight line or a big circle makes straightness easier, but it makes holding the engagement harder. Right? And we've got horseflies showing back up for the season, right? So we'll watch out for those. So the less I feel that point of pressure moving under the saddle, the more I know he's getting the hang of sort of keeping the hindquarters engaged. And he's got to work at it. He's got to find that coordination because the path of travel is making it harder for him to stay engaged, not easier. That's pretty good. And as I feel the pressure under the saddle kind of equalize, or it might even shift forward a bit, I'll have to watch for that. All of those are the changes we feel against our body while horses are changing coordination. Right, and that's interesting. So now the pressure, point of pressure, it went back to, it's still going kind of between the left and right back quadrants mostly, but now every once in a while I feel it shift to the front quadrant, which means the hindquarter engagement is really feeling stable to him to the point that he's starting to release some of that tension through the back muscles, but it hasn't made its way up through the upper back, shoulders, and neck yet. But when they start to do that, as the pelvis becomes more stable, the back muscles just don't have to work as hard. And I'm not asking him to lift his back, I'm asking him not to push his back down, right? That's where he's at right now, is stabilizing the hindquarters enough that he doesn't excessively overload the front legs. They're still heavier than they should be, but he can equalize his weight left to right, and he can control his weight a little bit front to back. And so as they become able to do that, especially through the coordination of the skeleton and the stability, like primarily the stability of the spine and the pelvis, right? So if the midline isn't stable, they have to compensate muscularly. And that's what he did for many years, even though he competed successfully. So, I know, I see that horsefly. So stabilizing the spine and pelvis is what generates the muscular release, the patterns of chronic tension, because the stability is shifting from a muscular event to a skeletal event. That's the way it's supposed to work. And so as his pelvis and spine get more stable, then as the back muscles begin relaxing, sometimes we feel the hole, we feel the dropped back, or we get pulled with weight into our seat. So when I feel like I'm struggling to put a little bit of weight into my thighs or equalize it between my thighs and feet, I have to take my shoulders forward sometimes to resist too much weight in my seat. And the struggle I feel is because I'm not getting that point of pressure in the back half of the saddle anymore. I'm starting to feel the residual tightness that was more related to how he was using the thoracic sling, the shoulders, and the neck, maybe even the upper back. So if you see me leaning forward a bit, it's to keep the weight in my thighs so that I can resist that same point of pressure, which is now shifting more between the left and right sides in the front half of the saddle. When I first got on, it was shifting left and right in the back half of the saddle. So he's already feeling more stable. It's much easier for him to start to engage his hindquarters and start controlling his movement from there, right? And when he's really stable and I don't feel the point of pressure, it doesn't have as strong of pressure, it has less force, or it quits moving around so much, that's the feeling of the balance coming through. So a balanced horse is so easy to ride because there is no point of pressure trying to catapult us forward, backward, left, or right. It's easy to just remain in balance because he's equalized his weight distribution left, right, front, and back. So in that process of finding that coordination, because it's complicated, we can't really make a horse coordinate, right? What we can do, and what I'm doing with him, is just using my weight shifts to resist his unequal weight shifts, right? So if his weight shifts right, I'm going to feel an upward bit of pressure on my left side. So that's where I'm going to put my weight, right? If his weight's still on the forehand, but he's compensating with the shoulders, I'm going to feel the pressure in the front of the saddle. If his weight's on the forehand and he's compensating with his back muscles or hindquarter muscles, I'm going to feel the pressure in the back half of the saddle. So that bubble of pressure can go anywhere, anytime. And it just tells us, as the coordination is changing, how the body is managing to not fall over, right? So when weight distribution is unequal, muscle tension has to increase in the opposing direction, or we fall, or horses fall, right? So feeling that bubble of pressure is the center point between muscle tension and unequal weight. So excessive muscle tension, which is counteracting unequal weight distribution. So that little point of balance, and especially when it's moving a lot, either tells me he's getting closer to balance, he's figuring out bits and pieces of the best coordination possible, or he's back in his old habit of dysfunction, right? So as soon as I got off of small circles with him and I started to work on bigger circles, which equals straighter lines, he really struggled to keep the engagement, the improvements in the hindquarter engagement that we had achieved on tighter turns and smaller circles. This is getting better now, but when he really stabilizes under the saddle, when he starts to really get control over his own body weight and release all the excessive patterns of muscle holding, he has to go really slow to get that coordination. And this is where people lose their patience, right? But it's no easier for the horse than if we were learning how to walk or ride a bike or walk on a balance beam or a tightrope or ride a unicycle. We don't learn at high speeds. We tend to learn and get awareness and make changes at slower speeds. But the right coordination, what's important about that is once he integrates that coordination in his nervous system and the muscles develop around that skeletal coordination to the point we see the horse look better, the muscling is better, right? So we can still see weakness in his back and hindquarter, which means the coordination isn't sort of his strongest habit. We have to work at it a little bit. But he's getting into the right coordination, able to equalize that weight in 2 dimensions much faster. So that means every training session, we're working the right muscles more and more that will lead him to having a beautiful trot, a lot of power along with a lot of control. And most horses, you can drum up the power pretty easily just by scaring them. But the control over the power is what makes the difference between fast movement and beautiful movement, right? And beautiful movement also happens to be the healthiest coordination for our horse, so it saves a lot on vet bills, and it takes our lame horse and gets them rideable again. Or our unsafe horse becomes safe to ride. So that's why I'm patient with the process and really want to make sure I get it right, because getting him to develop his coordination in the trot kind of depends on how easy it is for him to hold at the walk. And when he gets it and he can hold it, he takes kind of baby steps and really slows down his speed, right? And he still hasn't fully found that balance in the two dimensions just yet. I know, we've got horseflies flying around that are very distracting. So I'm just going to stay maybe 2 more minutes to the right, and we'll try a little to the left. And if that horsefly lands where I can get him, I'll get him. Right? But you can see, without me really giving a lot of aids, really just using my torso weight as a positive influence, kind of spotting him as his weight shifts around his body and his muscle use changes. My weight being in the right place through my torso and kind of equal between my seat and legs, right? I'm the point of reference for him to come and go until he finds a more balanced coordination. And really giving almost no rein aids anymore, not having to give leg aids, not having to ask him to speed up or slow down. He's figuring out, with every lap we make around the circle, how to find that more balanced coordination. And ultimately, a horse has to balance themselves, just like a person. I can't make a rider find the coordination of balance or ride beautifully, and I can't make a horse balance. I can guide, I can influence, I can direct, and sometimes I just gotta wait. So the fact that I'm not having to give rein and leg aids is a big advancement, that just my attention to where my weight needs to be, which is changing pretty much all the time in this particular ride, although it's a little subtle. So that point of pressure isn't nearly as strong as it used to be, which would make me struggle to keep my stability, right? But it's still there, and it's still moving around a lot, and he's still holding on to sort of that shortening through the neck, right? So it's a work in progress. So I think that's about 15 minutes to the right. Let's try a little to the left, and this is where I'm just going to pick up my reins to steer. I know, not pretty. There's our tight turn where he has to engage more, and he fumbled through that a little bit. Wasn't quite ready for it. And it was a little tighter turn than I needed to do, but he wasn't following the rein very well. Great, so now we're going to set it up and go left. And again, I'm just using my reins for steering. I'm out of my stirrups because it helps me stay aware of when I'm tightening a leg versus shifting my weight. So instead of gripping with my legs, oh, and he's really struggling this direction, so I'm glad I gave him a little more time on the other direction. And this direction, the point of pressure is now starting off consistently on the left back quadrant of the saddle. So that tells me his body is tight around the left rear quadrant of his body, right? So the left hind leg, the pelvis, the hip joint, the loin, the lumbar, that whole area in that quadrant is where he's compensating muscularly. Yeah, I know, the neighbors with their brakes. It's where he's compensating muscularly, which means his weight is overloading in exactly the opposite direction. So even though we can't feel where the weight's going, we feel the opposite effect of the muscles overcompensating for the unequal weight. So right now he's got unequal weight on his right front leg, so he's tightening all the muscles around the back left leg, right? So I'm just putting my weight over that point of pressure, and just there it started to change. So now it's shifted to the right, now left, now it's going back and forth with almost every stride. So I'm just shifting my weight along with that point of pressure. I know, and we're trying to avoid getting bitten by the horsefly. I know, one bit me the other day instead of you, and it hurt. I got a big old lump where it bit me on my foot. Good. Now, there's a big change, right? So I'm still feeling pressure going left and right across the back of the saddle, but it's less. It just sort of reduced in the amount of force I was feeling pushing up against me. There it just increased, and then it'll decrease again, right? And we see the result of the muscle changes and the weight shift in the use of the neck, in the posture, but it has to invisibly change first before we see the visible result. So when we're trying to ride and make it look right, but we have no idea what we're feeling, that's why we get stuck, or we kind of plateau with a horse, or the horse goes lame, or the horse blows up because it's just not working for them. But when we really closely work with the invisible forces, right, we can very accurately help guide those, which then indirectly helps him change his coordination, right? So there he just made that change. I didn't ask for it. It was a spontaneous change, and that bubble of pressure came out of the back left quadrant of the saddle and moved forward, a little bit under my left thigh, right? So again, as the hindquarter feels stable to him, which is sort of a minimal degree of hindquarter engagement, he's going to start relaxing those back muscles, and just there again, that point of pressure shifted to the front quadrants of the saddle from the back quadrants of the saddle. So now it's really pushing up on my left thigh in the left front quadrant of the saddle, which tells me that's where he's holding muscle tension, right? So his weight is sort of falling out the barrel to the right, and he's tightening up the whole left side of his forehand. And if he gets distracted, the balance goes out the window. So if he starts looking at the neighbors, I'll do some stuff with the reins to try to get his attention back on me. Right, so again, I could feel him pull my body weight into my seat, out of my legs. So I'm just going to lean a little bit forward, which is what helps me keep the weight in my thighs, because as that point of pressure moved from the back of the saddle to the front of the saddle, it's sort of throwing me back. So just to keep the weight equal between my seat and my thigh bones, I have to lean a little bit forward because I'm fighting a new amount of pressure that's coming from a different direction than what it was when I first started going left, right? And again, the more he starts to change his coordination in a positive way, the less you'll see me do. Ooh, I got to actually scoot over there. So there's a couple moments in there where the pressure really increases. It tries to throw me back to the right, and I have to kind of lean into it a little to keep my weight forward and left against that muscular force, right? And if I stay there, then that bubble of pressure starts to move around as he changes his coordination. Now it's starting to go right front, left front, where I'm feeling the pressure, or the point of pressure, the point of balance. And so we'll see what he does to work through this, right? And sometimes we feel that because the back relaxed, Sometimes we feel that because that's how the horse has been compensating muscularly, especially if they run out of muscular strength or energy through the back and hindquarters. They have to compensate with the shoulders, the front legs, the neck, the upper back. Right? So here, as he's starting again, as he starts to stabilize that bubble of pressure, and as the amount of pressure reduces, he goes really slow. That's him figuring out how to change his coordination. So if I blast through that thinking I need a competitive walk every freaking ride and I leave no room for exploration, then he's never going to find his balance, because there's no way any human on the planet can balance a horse better than a horse can balance themselves. They know what they feel. They find their own way there. Just like us learning to ride a bike or ride a horse or drive a car, nobody can ultimately teach us that coordination. At some point, we integrate it, we figure it out. And that's how I look at improving horses' movement. That's the idea behind self-carriage. They own it, right? So anytime I feel less sort of that point of pressure moving around the saddle, or it's not obviously in one quadrant more than another, or it's not moving around, or it's not trying to catapult me out of the saddle, I know the coordination is improved, even if I can't feel even if I don't know the details, even if I know nothing about biomechanics. Doesn't matter, right? I still feel the positive change in coordination. And if that happens in conjunction with him sort of literally taking one step at a time right now, I know that improvement in his balance and coordination is kind of new and unfamiliar. So I'm going to cut the boy some slack, right? Because the power and all the things we want in competition really has to come out of the correct coordination. And we think if we do enough maneuvers or exercises or transitions or circles and get the horse, we leverage the horse into doing those tasks, that somehow balance is going to be the result. But it's not, because you can do all of those tasks and even win a show with completely dysfunctional coordination in the horse. That's entirely possible. And the difference is behavioral blow-ups and lameness issues or health issues. And I go, so when we're thinking about retiring our horse at 12 or 15, it's like, wow, all of the training has really taxed the body rather than strengthened the body. And in rehab, we take what we get and we build towards strengthening the body in the most ideal coordination possible, right? In a way that feels safe and comfortable to the horse in the process. So there's a big change. And that full release of his neck, nose on the ground, is very difficult for this horse. I only get it a few strides right now on a big circle, and then he quickly loses it, right? But that's him telling me in that voluntary, significant change of posture, he's telling me I'm starting to feel stable enough to let go of all the muscles I've been overusing, right? So when they lift the back, they have to contract the muscles again. But when you're trying to get them out of a dropped back, that muscle lengthening tells you you're overcoming that habit. So from the posture of extension, long and low can be a good step in the right direction. It's still not balance, but it changes everything in the body on a muscular level. And it's the first minimal amount of stability through the spine and pelvis that the horse requires for correct movement, right? And if they're weak back there, weak in the back, unstable, wiggly, wobbly, or don't want to move forward at all, it is a delicate process to start working through initial changes, right? Once we start to get some initial changes, the changes gain momentum, right? So where he finally got stable and could really use his hindquarters on tight turns, we upped the ante a little bit by saying, can you find that again without the tight turn, because the tight turn itself was what helped him figure it out. So now we're saying, now that you figured it out, can you find it again if we challenge it by coming off the tight turn? And that's part of building up his coordination as well as his self-control, that are the ingredients we need to improve the trot. Right? And he still goes in and out of it. You can see it's a work in progress. So I trot him a little bit on the ground. I haven't really done a ton of it because this is where I feel he makes the best changes. And I think we better wrap it up. I'm really yapping away on you, Rafalko. So that's where he's at. And I'm hoping in the next video, I may show what he's learned by popping him on the lunge line, or we may, in the next video, start with trot transitions under saddle, because he's doing better and better ride by ride. He's just not as stable as I would like him to feel in the walk. So that's going to make transitioning to trot a little bit harder, transitioning in and out of trot. And it's also going to mean that I'm putting him back in a risk of getting lame again if I trot him while he's out of balance. So in rehab, that becomes very important. We don't need to aggravate the problem we're trying to solve. So that's sort of what tells us when to add speed and when to continue to work at the walk. I know. Okay, let me see if I can turn the camera off.